Rostant is my name. We start the ball rolling. We have the Group Chief Executive of Eastern Credit Union, he's present lecturer and a former minister who knows a lot about a lot. Conrad Enill is here. We thank him for his presence. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and thank you.
I want to start off talking about communication and communication having meaning in terms of, as opposed to just information. We see a lot of information being bandied about, be it media, be it government, be it opposition. Who do we really need to say they have a burden of getting that meaning across? Is it government? Is it private interests? Is it the layperson in the street?
I think that it begins with the government. And I think that the government has a mechanism. However, I don't think it is being used properly. Every week, the government meets and it makes strategic decisions about the future of the country. And right after cabinet meetings, there's a cabinet briefing where the media and specific government ministers meet and talk. Now, it would seem to me that the government indicates the projects or the things that they want to be put out into the media. But I think the entire media community is there. And they're the ones that really should take the responsibility of clarifying and, in fact, communicating. But I think that in many instances, they lose the opportunity because they're more concerned about the excitement or lack thereof of the matters discussed. I think that the mechanism exists, but I don't think that it is strategically being used. In other words, the issues that need to be raised, there is a forum for it. There are the individuals who are charged with the responsibility for providing you with the answers. But if you choose simply to go and be part of the audience without being part of the investigative work that is required, then I think that we are all poorer for it. And you lose an opportunity to do the next steps, which would be coming out of that discussion, private sector, ordinary individuals, investors, and everybody else will respond to that. So the short answer to your question is, I think the media has a role. I think that the media needs to re-engage with how it disseminates information. And I think that when it goes into a cabinet briefing, as it will every Thursday, I think it must go with its own agenda in terms of what it wishes to have discussed. And the government is going to give you their piece, and you're going to get the government piece. And I think you'll have a richer conversation as a result of it. I think if you don't do that, then the communication is going to be all over the place.
Outside of that mechanism, the role of bodies like chambers of commerce and industry, those private interest groups, the investors that you spoke of?
Well, they, in fact, will respond on the basis of what information is made available to them at these cabinet meetings. Now, understand what a cabinet meeting is. The government basically makes decisions about projects, about policy issues, about a number of things. And the way that they communicate that to the country is through this mechanism where they either do it through Parliament, where ministers make statements on their particular activities. Ministers come here and chat with you, or the entire community is in one place. Look at the power that is available to the media in terms of everybody collectively being in the same place. Think about what that could do in the context of communication and conversations. You have a couple hours that you could sit down there, and any element of anything that is disturbing anybody, you could treat with it. That then sets the tone for the next week in terms of what the chamber is going to say, because, for example, I expect that in this week's cabinet, if the Prime Minister is back, he will talk about his energy talks, and he will talk about what has occurred. Now, in the current situation, there is conversations around what time frame, what will happen, what are the issues. To me, those issues are better placed before him and his government so that you can get a sense as to timeframes, processes, NGC is finished with negotiations. That's where you get that kind of information from. So the chamber, yes. The other interest groups, yes. But the direct communication between the government and the country per week is done at those cabinet meetings, and I think that's where it needs to be.
Your initial perception of the energy talks just concluded with the Prime Minister and these bodies?
I think it's a positive step. Since the government entered office, there has been some ambiguity in terms of moving forward with an energy agenda. And I think for a very long time, one really wasn't sure as to what the government would do as it related to some of the critical issues in the energy sector. In fact, it became more pronounced when the new energy minister was not in office for a period of time. Today, however, I think that in looking back, work would have been taking place. And to be able to have the Prime Minister go off and come back or talk about negotiations being successful, it meant that there would have been a lot of discussions going on before, and this is simply a photo opportunity for communicating the work that has been done. So I think that this does a number of things. One, it restarts the energy program in terms of exploration activity. Two, it says to investors that Trinidad and Tobago, in spite of the challenges, is a good place to invest because large companies are in fact continuing to invest. But more than that, all the individuals who make their living from activities in energy are now able to say, okay, on the basis of these new activities, we can plan for economic activity, and therefore we might be able to hold on to staff a little bit longer, we might be able to retool, we might be able to start to look at planning for a brighter future. And I think that to me is positive.
In terms of inspiring that confidence in the energy sector and saying, okay, well, there is something that is happening, things are afoot for the energy plan. What does that do for the conversation, including this amorphous word, diversification?
Every time we talk diversification, I caution that we have to talk about diversification within a context. The issue for Trinidad and Tobago today, in my view, is not diversification alone. I think it is fiscal discipline. I think it is economic management. The fact of the matter is that today we have a situation where you're collecting 40 billion and you're spending 50 billion. That's not a diversification problem. That's a problem of spending beyond your revenue capacity. If you were in fact able to spend within your revenue stream, then the question of diversification would be less intense. Some people seem to think that diversification means that you must diversify away from energy and go into something else. All of us that are involved in business understand that there are products that we spend a lot of time and effort and energy in because they give us a bigger return than others. It's like saying to me that if I am involved in a very successful product, somehow or the other I must move away from that and go into other things. That makes no sense. Trinidad and Tobago is a hydrocarbon province. It has certain characteristics, it has certain knowledge, it has certain strengths. We can leverage that strength, and people are prepared to pay us for it. And on the basis of that, we run the country. Now, diversification. There is a need for diversification, but I think that the need for diversification, if it is going to work, it has to be government-led, strange enough. But those who talk about diversification within the context of the private sector. Our history has not been that. And therefore, our success has to be where, like in every Caribbean territory, the government has a very large footprint, and the government will have to do two things. One, it will have to speak to the vision. If you look at our Trinidad and Tobago energy model of success, it begins with a statement made by late Prime Minister Eric Williams when he called the country together by a statement that he made, which said, blessed as we are, we have a choice to make. We can do like some and simply export our oil and export our gas and at least for some small time live well. This we have chosen not to do because what it meant is that the country would be on the dole. Instead, what we have sought to do is to go into the very difficult challenges of creating a modern industrial state comprised of methanol, ammonia, and a number of petrochemicals, which is where we are today. That vision, I think, with the conclusion of aluminum, is more or less spent. It's finished. We have done all that we have to do there. That's traditional energy. We can go into renewables, but for energy, that is finished. I think that the government of the day or some future government need to look at a different vision. And from where I sit, I see an opportunity for us as a country to explore a knowledge-based type intervention. In 2004, when you looked at the statistics, we had about roughly, 14% of our population with tertiary education. Today, 64%. What does that do? When I was in Africa, one of the things that they were talking about is they now have oil, they now have gas, but the population is not where they need to be in terms of education. Why can we not, as a country, look at exporting knowledge?
But how do we leverage that knowledge that we have into places like Africa, into places like Guyana, so that the money is it comes back as opposed to just having individuals go to those places?
The model that we have to use is the Chinese model. So far, when I'm in Africa, what I see, when I was in Africa, what I saw is that our intervention has been either in the middle or the end. The Chinese coming at the beginning. So in a real sense, therefore, it means that a company like Petrotrin has to go out and clear the frontier and be at the table when you're beginning the conversation and bring the rest of the sector with you. To me, that's the model that you have to do.
We're going to be proactive enough for that anytime soon?
When you meet with the government at the post-cabinet conference, that's a good question to ask them, because that's where you will get that policy directive from. It has to be done by government, because these are large investments, but they also require the force of government sanction for it to work.
You use opportunities many times speaking about the current economic situation that we see ourselves. It's an opportunity to do what?
It's an opportunity to do two things. One, for us to fix some of the challenges that we currently face. There are inefficiencies in our system. And those inefficiencies are based on the fact that in many instances, when we set up some of the institutions, we didn't set them up for the purposes for which they have to operate today. We've set up a lot of institutions for administrative purposes, but today we run a business. This country is, in fact, very much industrialized, and therefore there's a lot of activity taking place. In the context of Trinidad and Tobago being part of the global environment and participating in trade, you need to have certain efficiencies in order to bring your cost down. And I think that those are some of the things that we have to treat with. Productivity, for example, is one of those things we talk about. But I keep saying that the productivity issue in the country can be solved if we solve the traffic situation. Because if I come to work for, coming down here, for example, this morning, I had to leave home at 4:30 for a 10-minute interview now. And then it'll take me 2 hours to get back to office. I mean, that is not productive. Because by the time I get back to work, I'm tired. I've worked for the day already. So I think that in looking at the productivity issue, the government needs to figure out how is it going to get its citizens to the workplace, or how do you change that configuration so you get more out of individuals rather than have them on the road in traffic, getting upset with everybody and those kind of things.
What are some of the things we need to put in place to be able to have a longer workday where people, there's a systematic application of flexi time to try to deal with that?
Well, you see, the way that we are organized currently, so you have kids, they go to school where you work, and therefore your entire life is built around the things that you have to do. If you talk flexi time, Well, you're going to have to talk flexi time for your kids as well. So does it mean that the mode of education will have to change? Currently, they are basically supporting your lifestyle. You here, they're at school. When you finish, you go pick them up. You go, those kind of issues. So I think the whole attitude towards a lot of things will have to change, because it would require us rethinking how we currently live, how we currently socialize, how we currently interact, how we currently train our kids.
In terms of changing that mindset, it seems as though many people are focusing more on the credit unions as a viable alternative. Where does Eastern stand in that mix?
Well, strange enough, we need to understand what a credit union is. A credit union is a group of individuals coming together, pooling their resources, and making it available to one another. And insofar as that is concerned, the model is that you are a customer, yes, but you're also a member. So you also participate in the governance structure, and you can direct and determine exactly how you would want this entity to assist you in improving the quality of lives. And in that sense, it is significantly different from the relationship you have with another financial institution, where you might simply be an account or a participant in a product and service. What we know is that during difficult times, specifically as we see now, because you belong to this pool, and because you can influence somebody thinking in the pool, you can come and say, okay, we have some particular kinds of problems, and the organization needs to respond. For example, yesterday, Eastern launched a Reboot Your Career program, which was intended simply for individuals who may have lost their jobs, or who may want to move on to another phase in their career, but they didn't know how. So we brought together some experts from the Atalakshak School of Business, some business strategists, some sociologists, who would explain to our members, and we had a group of members, that listen, change is not a very difficult thing. You have to mentally prepare yourself. You have to understand what your needs are. But more than that, there are tools that are available. And there are people who we can point to who have gone through this and who have said, hey, it can happen. That's the value we add. And that's what we're focusing on right now, making sure that those of our members who are in difficult circumstances and who need some support in terms of moving to the next level, that we provide that.
Eastern has been ahead of the curve in terms of being a credit union that has an ATM system or structure in place. There have been conversations, and we're seeing a pilot being rolled out right now with the Sugar Pay, Trinidad and Tobago. What does that mean for the financial services landscape here?
Well, the thing about it is that if your members operate in an economy, and basically they're very successful, and they're very intelligent in terms of understanding what is taking place, then as an organization you have to respond. Eastern has found itself in a situation where, because it is governed, and it's the only institution at this point in time, by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, I find that we have a lot more rigor and a lot more that we have to respond to with a regulator like the Central Bank. And therefore what it does is that it puts us in a place where we have to do things differently. We have to do things faster. But more than that, it allows us to enter the financial landscape as an equal with most of the other regulators. And I think that is pushing us to see how do we maintain our flexibility as a people-based institution, while still trying to look at compliance issues, regulatory issues, and all the other kinds of issues, and manage costs. Because at the end of the day, the members, the owners, are also saying, hold on a minute, we also need a return on our investment. And insofar as that is concerned, we find ourselves having to look at the same issues that everybody has to look at, same efficiency issues, customer service issues, manage delinquency, manage growth, manage data, look at where we need to go, and those kind of things.
Conrad Enill, thank you very much for your presence here this morning. And we want to thank you for tuning in. This is Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago.